So I think we're good to go. Looks like we've got a great attendee list again today for our second ever Robert Half webinar. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Steve Sully, and I'm the director for Robert Half's London operation. Apologies to anyone that already knows that, who dialed in yesterday. I think I'd like to start by saying thank you for your time on the webinar today. Thank you for your business in the past, present if we're working with you today, and most importantly, thank you for your partnerships. Despite the unprecedented challenges that COVID-19 is presenting to both our professional and personal lives, it's really encouraging to see the various innovative adaptations in certain areas of the market. We're seeing a wealth of organisations reacting very positively with rapid changes relating to remote workflow management, job function priorities, and expectation setting. What this ultimately shows us is that there will continue to be the need to onboard new staff, and that must continue. We're seeing some innovative ideas and creative best practices adopted by our clients, many of which we'll look to cover on this call. And hopefully I'll get the opportunity to cover off a few innovative ideas, groundbreaking ideas of our own that will help you continue with your hiring processes and continue to onboard both interim and permanent staff. At Robert Half, we understand what it means to candidates when we find them a job, not only from an income perspective, from a dignity perspective at times like this. And equally, we understand how important it is for companies to continue to find and hire top talent. So without further ado, I probably should introduce our special guest speaker, Ms. Kristen McNamara. Very, very privileged to have her on the call today. Kristen's been with the Robert Half business for 23 years. She oversaw my rookie start to Robert Half myself 12 years ago. She started with the US, as you'll see when she starts talking in a second, in our Miami branch, and has since moved on to manage multiple lines of business across multiple geographies. She actually moved to the UK in 2005 to do my job and run the London branch. So as you'll tell in a second, very, very big shoes to fill. Kristen is now the Senior Director for Staff Development, Leadership Development and Talent Acquisition for all 16 of our countries outside of the US. Yeah, over to you, Kristen.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how to onboard new employees. I'm going to have to beg your forgiveness. I am not a Zoom expert, so if I have any issues, please, I'm going to thank you in advance for your patience. So my guess is that if you are here today on our How to Onboard New Employees Remotely webinar, you are either hiring a Robert Half employee, or hiring somebody permanently through Robert Half, or you're hiring a Robert Half consultant or one of our temporaries. And I think we also have invited some clients who are also in the process of hiring some individuals and potentially thinking, how in the heck am I ever going to get somebody from my living room to their living room hired and onboarded and successful? And so that is the intention for the webinar today. I have to say that if you are worried about how this could possibly happen, again, from dining room to dining room or with your team dispersed across the nation practically, I have to promise you that it is absolutely plausible and feasible to onboard new employees remotely. Whilst I have been at Robert Half for 23 years and spent many years in our sales offices around the US and the UK, for the last 8 years, I have worked remotely. So I'm in my home office right now. I like to think of my other office as Heathrow Terminal 5. I miss all my friends there who I know very well in security because I spend probably 70 or 80% of my time traveling. And as Steve did say, I do manage learning and development and leadership development in 16 countries. And so my entire team works from home or they are traveling in planes, trains, and automobiles. And in the last 2.5 years, I have personally onboarded 3 employees remotely. So I can assure you that it is absolutely plausible and feasible. It simply requires a different approach. It requires a little bit more planning. So for those of us on the call who maybe aren't the best list makers, this might be a lesson in planning. It also requires a really smart use of the resources and the individuals within your organization. It also requires a commitment not only to onboarding somebody to be really clear about what their job description is, what you're hoping that they're going to achieve, but it also requires a real intentional approach to how you onboard them into your culture, because your culture exists whether you're sitting in a boardroom, whether you are sitting by the coffee machine talking about the football scores over the weekend, or whether you're all like us on a Zoom call. Your corporate and your company culture still exists, and the sooner you could get an employee to feel comfortable and included in that culture, the more likely they are to succeed. So we're actually going to break down these 4 stages of, we're going to break down remote onboarding into 4 stages. These might be slightly different depending on the complexity of the role. Week 1 might end up being week 1 and 2 for you, but for just generic purposes, these 4 stages seem to be the easiest way to walk you through this. And so we have post-offer and acceptance. So that is literally from the day that you decide to make an offer to the day that it's accepted prior to the start date. We'll talk about day 1. You only have 1 chance to make a first impression. And it's even more interesting when you're trying to make that impression while somebody's working at their home office and you might be working from your dining room. We'll talk about week 1, which is going to be a jam-packed week for the new hire. And then also weeks 2 to 4, because usually after a month, someone starts to feel like they kind of have their sea legs within your organization. I want to start with a model that for anybody who on the call is a project manager or has a previous life in project management, this will look very familiar. For those of you who don't know it, it's actually the RACI model. So it's an acronym for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And in essence, it's a fantastic tool for project managers, but for any type of project or initiative or goal that you're setting, what we would recommend is that you list out all the tasks that you would need to get done in order to onboard somebody, and then go through who is responsible, who's actually the person who's going to actually do that task. The next group would be the accountable population. This is typically a manager or a leader or a team supervisor. And this is the individual who will probably delegate the task, assign the task, and then once it's done, make sure that it's been done correctly. The consulted population, this is usually a subject matter expert. This might be somebody from IT, legal, HR, finance, but somebody with a very specific skill set to ensure that whatever you're trying to do is very likely to succeed. And then the informed, and this group is, this group is the population of anybody who needs to be kept in the loop. And in essence, this would probably be anyone who's going to be working, in our case, with the new hire, anybody who would need to interact with them in order for the work to get done. So while we go through these 4 stages, we're basically going to give you almost like a virtual checklist. And when this webinar is done, we will be sending out to you a follow-up document, and it will have items from this checklist in there. So please don't feel like you need to write everything down. But one thing I would recommend is, as I go through this checklist and you consider, how might I use this in my organization? I do ask you to think, who might be responsible? Who might I be able to hold accountable? Is that me? Who would I need to consult, and who would need to be informed? And by doing that, you end up sharing some of the responsibility, because it's a lot to bring somebody on board, as all of you know, I'm sure, as leaders, but not only to do that from a remote aspect and with the current environment that we're in, you'd be crazy not to use all the talent and smarts in your organization, but you get to delegate work. It's a fantastic opportunity onboarding somebody remotely to give some individuals within your team an opportunity to show their desire to be a leader. And in essence, by using the RACI model, you actually end up freeing up some of your own personal time to get some of the things done as well. Because as we all know, there is, particularly with permanent placement, there is an onboarding period. So I'm going to start with the post-offer acceptance and the pre-start date. And again, this could be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks with a permanent position. This could be up to 24 hours with a consultant or a temporary position. And I guess my memo or the vision that goes through my head when I see the slide is logistics, logistics, logistics. So you will want to make sure that you have your contract signed, whether that needs to be sent through the mail and returned, whether that's, DocuSign or some type of software system, whether that's scanning something and sending it back to you. And you also want to make sure that you have that contract signed and that you can get the individual who will be working for you the hardware, the licensing for the software, any data access submit and getting that submitted to IT. And you'll probably want to be able to notify HR for that as well. And I think this is a challenge that many companies are having because they might not have the hardware. They might not have the VPN support. And Steve, if it's okay with you, because I know the UK is rolling out some support for our customers in this arena. So if I can ask you to come back and just clarify for me, because I think every country might be slightly different.
Quite exciting stuff, really. Especially as a director that's got both permanent and interim placements in my world. I was very, very nervous about how we'd be able to still commit to placing interims on assignment as quickly as we normally do in getting them up to speed. The fantastic thing about our business is that we invested in tablet technology some time ago. So everyone has got the ability to work remotely within Robert Half. What that left us with a surplus of laptops that were there on a shelf, ready for the next wave of new Robert Half employees we continue to grow. But obviously in the current climate, what we've done is taken the decision to redeploy those laptops as loaner laptops to any sort of new starters on a perm basis that maybe need to get up and running fairly quickly, or certainly more so on the interim side of things. So we've already redeployed over 30 loaner laptops to interims during COVID-19 for them to get set up, be on board remotely and start their assignments. Even more exciting today, and I'm not a techie by any means, but we've invested in AWS, which is Amazon Workspace, which is a very safe, secure, cloud-based solution where we can offer access to our clients' various CRM, ERP systems on our loaner laptops to then pick up the assignments and run with that and get going straight away. So hopefully today we've got a guinea pig actually with a big global facilities management business with a candidate that's starting tomorrow that will go through that process. But all of the testing so far looks great. But yeah, for anyone that was maybe considering hiring an interim but wasn't sure how to get them up to speed, link in with me later, give me a shout, speak to your local Robert Half connection, because the loaner laptops and access to AWS now makes onboarding an interim as easy remotely as it was face to face.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Steve. So clearly someone's going to be working from home. And so whether they're using your hardware or Robert Half's hardware or potentially their own hardware, making sure that they can access your systems and get the work done is really critical. One of the other things that we would recommend is before the start that an email is drafted to that employee so that by the time they get that laptop, an email is waiting for them in their inbox saying, welcome, these are our company policies, our working hours. You might even have a work from home dress code, whatever that happens to be, and just clarifying any information that they need to feel comfortable so that they will be able to, again, seamlessly kind of fall into the culture. I would also recommend that you send out an email to all of your team, anyone that the employee is going to be working with, and you probably do this if in a physical work environment anyway, but just making sure that everybody knows that Kristen McNamara will be joining our team meetings as of Monday, and she's here to do XYZ for the organization, and please help welcome her. Whether you have a formal mentoring program within your organization or not, many companies don't, particularly with remote onboarding, I would highly recommend that you have a mentor assigned and that mentor reaches out to that employee prior to their start date. It could be a 10-minute conversation. If you need anything, here's my number, call me. Here will be my email address. What you would like, I guess what I'd like for you to have the option is that you're not the only point of contact for the employee, because again, they don't have the chance to sit in the boardroom and meet everybody. And if you have a mentor that they can talk to, they can go and ask them questions. How do I get this done? What do I do if I get stuck here? Versus constantly going to their supervisor who's obviously trying to work as well. I would also ask that you, or recommend that you pre-populate your candidate's employee calendar with all team meetings, any meetings that they'll need to have with other functions, with their supervisor. I would also suggest that before they start, you put in one-to-one meetings where they individually meet with anybody else on the team or anybody else that they're going to work with. So they get to really build some of those relationships. And I'd also would recommend that you time block for them to have some training. It doesn't have to be extremely robust, particularly if it's a temporary who might be with you for a month and they have a very specific job description. Whether that training is how to get into our systems or, you know, very simple training versus sometimes you have an onboarding training from HR, but booking that time in for that person before they start will make day one so much easier. So if the previous to the start date is all about logistics, onboarding and day one is about expectations. So I'm going to go through probably about 6 or 7 suggestions that we have. I think that this is a day where you're probably going to want to block off, you know, whether you start at 8, 8:30 or 9. I would highly recommend that you are the first person that individual has a conversation with that day. And then if you have pre-populated their calendar, again, you'll have some time to interact with them and set expectations, but you'll also be able to hopefully have them speak to some other individuals within the company, have them have a meeting with their mentor, so that you get some time to actually do probably some of your other leadership roles and responsibilities. This probably would have been covered in the interview. I certainly hope so, but you know, review the goals of the role and the job description and not just what that individual is here to do, but if you can connect what that individual is doing on a daily basis with the overall health of the organization, the company, the mission, the values, the goals, that puts a lot of purpose behind what someone's doing. And particularly when someone's working from home and you don't get to read their body language, the more you can connect sometimes maybe arduous or repetitive work or one small part of a large overall process, if you can connect that with the bigger picture, I think that creates a lot of meaning and a lot of commitment in the employee to the organization. You also might want to conduct a products and service review. So, you know, for example, at Robert Half, we go over every single line of business that we have. We go over our company history. And as you probably would do this in a physical office as well, it just, you know, when someone's sitting on their sofa or sitting in their office at home, you want to make sure that they are starting to feel a little included in the culture. I would also reconfirm expectations. What's expected of the employee whilst they're working at home? That might mean that, like, you know, from 8 to 12 and 1 to 5, I need you to have your phone by you. I need to be able to access you. That might also include what the employee can expect from you. I'm going to give you your support, promised. I'm going to give you training. I'm going to make sure you connect with the people on your team. But those expectations are really critical on day one. I'd also break down some of the tasks of their job description. Somebody might have a 30-line item job description. There might be a temp with a 5-line item job description. If you could actually just highlight, for all I want you to do this week is get comfortable with X. All I would like you to do for the next 2 days is make sure that you feel capable to do X, Y, and Z. That just breaks it down for the employee a little bit. And then I would, again, jointly schedule at least 2 one-to-one check-ins with that employee. You might actually want to have 3. You might want to include the mentor in there, but those daily check-ins I think are really important. They can be 5, 10, 15 minutes. Maybe it's 8 o'clock and 12 o'clock. Maybe it's 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock. But for those meetings, I humbly suggest From my own experience as a remote employee for many years, my boss is in California. She's never missed a meeting without, unless it was an extreme situation where she couldn't make it. So, set the meeting, keep the meeting, be really clear about what you want to check in on so that they come prepared to that meeting as well. I would also try, if you can, to provide org charts and department overviews. Again, what we want to try to do is embrace this person into the culture, and the more that they can start to talk to these individuals without having to feel like they have to go through you, I think the more they'll start to just feel a little more independent and be able to work on their own. And then again, on day one, please, if you can, set up those one-to-one meetings where it's just them and their colleagues, where they can get to build those relationships. Obviously, we need to make some time to make sure that they have all the systems needed to be successful in their role. And as I said earlier, if you think of the RACI model, this does not all have to be on you. There will be people within your team. There'll be subject matter experts. There'll be people from IT that you can delegate this to. And, little things that might take 10 minutes that would mean nothing more than 10 minutes to somebody else would probably mean the world to that new employee. Okay, so our onboarding during week one. You might be shocked when I say this, but I'm going to come back to the RACI model. So if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So where we use the RACI model in the preparation and day one, what I would actually recommend that you do here is you utilize the RACI model with your employee. During week one, I would try to find some time where you go over the job description again, and I would line item all of those in priority of most important and most urgent, down to least important and least urgent. And then I'd ask and I'd review with the employee, who's responsible for this? Do they feel comfortable taking responsibility for this? Might they be accountable for it and they need to work with other people who need to do the work for them? Or if they're responsible for something, but they need to actually be accountable to maybe somebody else in another department or another function, do they know who that person is? So I would go through, again, every line item in the job description and just try to see it to confirm responsibility, accountability. Do they need to consult with other people within the organization, or are people actually going to be coming to them to be consulted? And then who might need to be informed on what they're doing. I think for every organization, there's a definition of urgent and important. And so to be able to prioritize during week one, the most important and urgent tasks, I think, will really create a certain level of comfort for that employee, a certain level of direction, and also a certain level of autonomy. Because really what we want to do this week is help them feel as autonomous as possible, as quickly as possible. So defining urgent, for example, in Robert Half, urgent literally means right now. If Steve were to call me and say, Kristen, I have an urgent need, I would try to drop everything I could to help him. In my husband's organization, that means probably tomorrow. So really defining urgent, defining important, and making sure that that is crystal clear. Those expectations, as I said, are really important, because without that clarity from the supervisor or the leader, three things might happen. One, the employee just basically uses the same urgent and important definitions from their last organization. Two, they try to be so valuable that they potentially rush work and could potentially step on toes. Or three, my biggest fear is that they don't want to step on anybody's toes and they just wait for direction. And again, when we're in this remote situation, that will feel like wasted time. So I want to try to avoid that for you if possible. Weeks 2 to 4. So you'll see a scale. It's not a scale of justice. It's meant to show a balance. I think this is where we start to balance the personal check-ins with the professional check-ins. You'll know by this time, the competencies that are there, the skills that are there. I think, you'll know the person's character a little bit more. They'll start to feel a little more familiar with the individuals that they work with. And again, the culture is forming and it's there, whether we're on a Zoom call or we're in a board meeting. But what I would humbly suggest is you start to move away from the maybe 2 or 3 times a day check-ins to maybe once a day check-ins, ideally. One of the things that we do at Robert Half, particularly when we're onboarding somebody, in fact, in the first quarter, but it's kind of the best practice that we have, which I have kept myself in the role that I'm in now, is weekly check-ins with people. And keeping that time and making that time where you're really balancing the focus on how are you developing as an employee. Let's look at your work. Let's look at your contribution. I think the best recommendation I have for that meeting, and again, it's probably a 15, 20, 30-minute meeting, is that you take the same amount of time prior to that meeting to prepare. Another acronym that I love very much is the SWOT acronym. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. For strengths and weaknesses, if you can come to that meeting prepared, that weekly meeting with your strengths and weaknesses for your skills, your knowledge, your expertise, and being able to give that feedback to the employees is really important in getting that feedback. With opportunities, I'd look at how we can capitalize on their productivity, on their knowledge, and are they sharing that knowledge within the rest of the team or the organization. And threat sounds a little threatening, but really when we say threats, I think what that really means is looking at what could derail the person. They're sitting on their couch, they're trying or sitting in their office and trying really hard to contribute, but sometimes there's that isolation at home and they're new. Some of these employees may never even have been inside the four walls of your corporate headquarters. And so what could possibly derail them from feeling confident, from staying focused, and from staying productive? So during those weeks 2 to 4, you want to try to move away from the, are you okay, you okay, you okay, where they start to flow to you with some of that information in those meetings and actually holding them quite accountable. So if we tee them up with all the logistics that they need to be successful, the training, the networking, the org charts, the RACI model, and all of the systems knowledge that they need, we're extremely clear about the expectations and the accountabilities. I think what happens in week 2 to 4 is we start to get a much more comfortable and relaxed employee. I think at that point, we're kind of actually, Steve, we're almost back to you in a second here, but I guess my closing point, and Steve, I guess over to you in a second, but it's just a crazy time. And I think it feels very hard, I think, to work from home right now because quite frankly, we have had no choice. The choice of going into an office has been taken away from us. And I know any of my colleagues who work with me will know I've had my good days and my bad days because I'm not someone who likes to be controlled or told what to do, for sure. But I think if we can look at this time as a moment in time that's actually going to force us to consider how we work remotely, how we work flexibly, how we deal with ambiguity. This is a crash course for leaders around the globe on how we deal with ambiguity. And we can either fail or we can really try to innovate from this. So I think from the frustration, if we work together and learn together, I know, Steve, you spend a lot of time talking to your clients about what they're doing and try to take best practices and share that with your other clients. And I think this is just one example of how we can innovate through our frustration and not let the fact that we are all working from home prevent us from running our businesses, getting people opportunities, and impacting our communities. And I think, even the way we look at how we source candidates for our clients has changed. So I guess with that, Steve, I'm going to hand it back to you for your closing comments and any thoughts you might have on what I've said.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant, Kristen, and I'll close out in a second and give you the credit that you absolutely deserve. But I think you finished on a very, very poignant point there, because I think Robert Half and all of the teams that I've ran across my 12 years have always prided ourselves in delivering the best of the best candidates. But in business as usual circumstances, that tends to mean the best of the best candidates that within a certain geography surrounding a client, so that they're actually able to make that commute and get to work within a certain time frame. What's been quite exciting and might sort of lay down how we work moving forward is that we can now genuinely offer the best of the best candidates or the best of the best within a certain talent pool across the entire UK. Or maybe even globally. We've had a couple of really real life examples where a couple of our candidates are Antipodean candidates that were here on visas that maybe are a bit spooked and kind of ran back to Australia and New Zealand to be with their families and their friends. We've actually managed to keep them working on assignments here in London. We actually placed a payroller. Payrollers seem to be in demand at the minute with the amount of sort of pay and benefit changes there are in the furlough scheme, etc. That pays the payroller, again, in a London assignment that's based up in Edinburgh. That never would have happened. So I think that's been really, really eye-opening to me. I think the other exciting thing that I've seen, sounds a bit sales pitchy now, but it's a true story, is that only yesterday we closed out a full end-to-end mid-COVID perm process for an FD for quite a significant organisation. There was a key critical hire. I never thought anyone looking at FD level would accept a role without sort of looking at their new manager in the whites of their eyes in more of a formal meeting or walking around the offices. But with technology like this and both parties fully embracing it, all three parties, including ourselves, embracing it, it just shows what magic can get done. Yeah, I suppose just a couple of closing comments from me, Kristen. As always, this is why you're my favourite. I thought the content was absolutely spot on and very, very relevant. I think we'll be building upon your content and get more of this stuff out very, very soon. Delivery, as always, was brilliant. So big thank you to you. Thank you to everyone who's attended the webinar today. As I said, we had a fantastic attendee list. There are going to be more webinars. I think I said it yesterday, never did I ever think, Kristen's probably in the same boat as me, that I'd ever be presenting a webinar, especially with a face for radio. But no, I think we're going to be getting more content together. We've adapted really quickly, as I mentioned, the AWS and the learner laptop stuff from a more operational perspective, but also just giving clients at a time when maybe hiring isn't the priority and sort of taking stock of everything that you've got, is getting more relevant material out to you guys and adapting to your needs and requirements as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
So on that, and really importantly, everybody on the call today, or everyone that registered, will be asked to give us some feedback on how you thought today's webinar went, and probably more personally, what you want to hear about. We've got an amazing, best-in-class learning and development team. That's not a plug for you, Kristen, I promise, because it's the truth. But they're all set and ready to write new material and deliver more material as and when you need it, as our sort of valued candidates and clients. Everyone will get a copy of the link as well on email today, so you'll be able to listen back over the webinar to sort of some of the key points around the RACI model, or forward that on to other key members within your organisation that might benefit from it. We're actually going to repeat the webinar again next Wednesday, and repeat yesterday's webinar next Tuesday as well. So touch in with your key contact at Robert Half, and they'll make sure they can give you access, or anyone else in your team, as I said. And I suppose that just brings me to say, lastly, again, thanks again, Kristen. You were amazing today, putting this together so quickly. And yeah, stay safe, stay in, and wash your hands, everyone. Good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.